On December 21st, 2023, Jenny Carolina was traveling in a taxi to her agreed meeting with a man in an apartment in the Piantini neighborhood in the city of Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. After midnight, he arrived at the place, paid the trip to his trusted driver, and she asked him to pick her up 2 hours later. After that time, the driver returned and told her by message that he was waiting for her downstairs. Minutes later, he received the young woman's response, asking him to wait about 20 more minutes. Time passed, and suddenly it was 1 hour without Jenny coming down from the apartment. Worried, the driver called her several times, but she never answered and never got out at that time. The man didn't know it, but he would be the last person to see her alive. Baffled, he alerted Jenny's sister, who immediately approached the apartment along with a policeman. As they waited for the elevator, they passed a man who exchanged a fearful glance with the officer. The sister who knew that man asked him where Jenny was, to which he replied that he had said this. He hurried out. The policeman had a bad feeling, and his suspicions were correct when, upon opening the door of the apartment, they were confronted with a scene that turned their stomachs. The young woman didn't really like nightlife. She only drank a little wine on some occasions with friends, and what she enjoyed most was dancing, an activity that had always been her passion. Jenny had arrived in the Dominican Republic along with her sister in 2017 in search of a better life, but met her unfortunate end in the Central American country. They both started working as waitresses in a field over the years. Jenny quit that job and started an online swimsuit store. This new venture began to improve its economy, and finally took it one step further and opened a physical store in Venezuela from the Dominican Republic, without stopping selling through the networks. In this country, everything was going well in Jenny's life. Christmas was approaching, and both sisters would spend it together, because her whole family was in her native country. What the sister didn't know was that this time she would spend the holidays alone and full of pain. After 6 a.m. on December 21st, a phone call woke up J.C. Canelon. It was the taxi driver Manuel Antonio Rosario Santana, who asked her if she knew where Jenny was, because he was waiting for her outside a boy's apartment building and not answering her calls. At that moment, the young woman felt that something was wrong. J.C. knew his sister was going to meet Michelle Saba, aka the Italian, that night. Fearing the worst, J.C. called an ex-girlfriend of the subject to ask for her phone number. Although the ex didn't want to pass it on, she promised him that she would try to contact the man. She waited nervously. After a few minutes, the ex-girlfriend informed him that Michelle Saba had assured her that Jenny had never reached the tower. This disturbed the woman even more. Someone was lying. Taxi driver Osaba, without wasting another minute, contacted some friends to accompany him to the address where the taxi driver had left his sister. When they arrived at the luxurious building 39 of the Switchba Tower, and Refa, one of his friends, called National Police Officer Raul Alexander Almanzar Galva to show up at the residence. When the cop arrived, he went up to the apartment with his sister to see if Jenny was there. It was then that they had a head-to-head encounter with Michelle Saba. When questioned about the young woman's whereabouts, he limited himself to responding that Jenny had gone his version regarding what he had said to his ex. He had already changed. The policeman noticed nervous behavior in the man, worthy of a suspicious person hiding something. So he decided to inform his superiors of what was happening and asked for reinforcements. Azabalo was waiting outside the lobby of the building for a motorcyclist who, upon noticing the police presence, quickly left the place. Thus, the suspect was cornered by the police. There was a reason for his nervousness, and that was that he knew that such a heinous crime was about to be discovered inside the apartment. The corporal and the missing woman's sister arrived on the 11th floor. They walked along the length, her heart racing against her chest. He sensed that something very bad was happening as they approached. His nervousness was growing. When they arrived at door number 3, the officer forced it open, encountering an eerie darkness. He turned on the light and they both entered. It was then that the corporal noticed traces of blood on the floor and walls of what looked like evidence of a heinous crime. They didn't take another step. The officer knew that this was a more serious case than he had imagined. When reinforcements arrived, another police officer found a black suitcase in a bedroom next to a bed, with more blood. The cop walked over to the suitcase, wondering what might be inside. After years of witnessing crime scenes, his suspicions were true when he opened it and found the severed torso of a female body. Unable to bear the uncertainty, the sister entered the room and found herself face to face with a murder that could only have been carried out by an inhuman being. As Jessie approached the scene, screaming and crying, she identified that torso as part of the body of her sister, Jenny Carolina. After the tragic discovery, several members of the public ministry, the National Police, and the National Institute of Forensic Sciences joined the suitcase, who raided the apartment and ended up finding the head and part of the thighs of the victim in a black bag in the kitchen refrigerator. The feet were found elsewhere in the apartment. Investigators continued to review the scene, and they found what appeared to be the weapons with which the crime had been perpetrated: a Glock Model 45 pistol, a silencer, 3 knives of different sizes, and a set of handcuffs. In addition, there was a box of diazepam pills, a powerful sedative, a backpack with a 20-foot rope, synthetic drugs, and finally, brown women's slippers that belonged to the victim. No one who had entered this apartment could believe that such a brutal act was real. They had only one person in mind who could have done it, and that was Saba. Immediately, the National Police arrested Michael Saba, alias the 30-year-old Italian, who had rented the apartment through the Airbnb platform and expired on the 23rd of the current month. The preliminary report of the authorities indicated that the detainee had committed the act in the midst of a strong argument he had with the victim. During the interrogation, the criminal confessed that he shot him with the gun in the heart and then proceeded to dismember the lifeless body. According to the information collected on the day of the tragic event, Michel Saba was left in the rented apartment at 1:50 a.m. and 1 p.m. in the afternoon by his trusted taxi driver, who called herself Bizarra. Like the famous music producer, when he got out of the vehicle with a backpack, some grocery bags, another gift, and was helped by the driver to take a black suitcase up to the apartment. He later left just as the clock struck 12:17 p.m. Jenny Canelon was left in the lobby of the tower by the taxi driver, with whom she agreed to pick her up approximately 2 hours later after passing the time. Around 4 o'clock, 7:02 in the morning, the driver Rosario Zancana sent a message to the victim in which he asked her if she was ready to leave the place. The woman replied yes, to which he replied that she should go down because he was already waiting for her at the entrance, and she responded with a simple "okay." Minutes later, the victim wrote to her driver again to go up to the 11th floor, to which he asked him why he wanted him to go up to this. The young woman asked him to pick her up half an hour later, and specifically at 4:20, the victim sent some audio messages to the taxi driver saying that Zava had paid her very well to dance, so she asked her to wait about 20 minutes more. After that message, he sent him another audio saying that the subject was drugged. Then the young woman called the taxi driver and asked him if there was a man in the vicinity, to which he answered no. At 4:40 a.m., she wrote to her again telling her that she was about to get off. But later she sent her a new audio message, telling her that the man who was about to arrive was the partner of someone who knew her and who was already getting off. While the taxi driver was waiting for Jenny to appear, the subject who had named Jenny by the name of Alex Arias Lalo arrived at the entrance of the complex. It was then that the taxi driver wrote to the victim saying, "The man is here." He was going up, but the young woman never answered that message, and the conversation came to an end. In the security cameras of said watchtower, it could be observed how Alex, the second man, got up and down at 15 minutes, while the taxi driver continued calling and writing to the young woman until 6:10. Since Jenny never came down from the apartment, the driver notified the victim's sister, which triggered the horrendous discovery. The atrocious crime of Yenny Canelon appalled the entire Central American country and also her native country, Venezuela. Some netizens were furious about the young woman's sad ending, while others weaved versions of what the young woman had been doing in the room, and that had little to do with her unfair ending, according to unofficial information shared by the commenter. Pedro Jimenez, the victim, worked as a maid, and her partner, who at the time of the incident was imprisoned for gender violence, had removed her from that job. According to that version, Jenny's partner had ended up behind bars because he had found her with another man and hit her. According to these theories, without confirmation, the alleged attacker of the apartment and the young woman's boyfriend knew each other previously and were very close. Jenny's family denied everything that was said on the networks and in the media and asked that the public please have respect and not spread false information. In addition, they publicly demanded justice and that the accused will pay for the events. Regarding the reason for the macabre death, Jessie told the media that only God, her sister, and the beast that had taken her life. Did you know what really happened that night? J.C. Canelon was interviewed in the homicide department of the National Police for more than 8 hours, and when she left, she addressed journalists and begged the intervention of the Dominican authorities in the case. He also asked for help to keep his sister's executioner from getting out of prison. He desperately requested help from the Central American country because his family was in Venezuela. He couldn't handle the situation, and he couldn't afford lawyers. After Jenny's crime, the young woman had been left completely alone and helpless in the country, while the alleged murderer was serving his detention with 1 year of preventive detention in the Nahalo Men's Prison, San Cristobal Province. The police began investigations to bring him to trial. Among the evidence found at the crime scene was a gun silencer, but they could find no documentation to show that Saba had permission to carry them. The discovery of the silencer, a device attachable to the barrel of a firearm whose objective is to reduce or eliminate the sound of the shot, has caught the attention of researchers because its use and acquisition were prohibited by law. In the Dominican Republic, justice consulted a soldier whose identity was kept under wraps, who explained that this type of accessories was prohibited even for members of the country's security forces. Therefore, a civilian was not allowed to have it either. The soldier stressed that, like weapons of war, silencers were not sold by armories. This led to the suspicion that Saba may have brought him into the country, as rifles and pistols without legible numbers were smuggled in from the United States, Colombia, or Venezuela. Continuing with the indignation, the victim had published the last one, TikTok, on December 12th, which generated greater confusion for investigators. And in the video, Jenny was observed in a compilation of photos and videos with her partner. That led to different questions. The reasons why the victim was in an apartment in the early hours of the morning with another man, who ended up taking him. Life, It was the first question that the agents asked themselves, and that still has no answer, so far. Investigators are unaware of the link that Sava had with Yenny on the part of the accused. Also, there was some planning after committing the crime outside the building. A trusted man on a motorcycle was waiting for him, whom he had contacted via WhatsApp to buy him white paint. Something to paint the walls with and latex gloves, surely. He sought to cover up the stains of his crime that had been watered all over the apartment. According to testimonies, at the time of the arrest in the watchtower, there was only one receptionist in the surroundings of that sector. The crime went unnoticed by building security and several passers-by in the area, who did not notice anything strange that night from the building security man. He noticed something was wrong when he saw the first cop, and then he was roasting down the stairs when he was intercepted by the authorities and arrested on the spot. The agents were unable to count on further testimonies of the events. More news about the detainee came to light when the media broke the news that he had been tortured by the police during his detention. This information was revealed by the defendant's lawyer, who requested that his client was evaluated by a coroner upon leaving court. Saba remained in the face of questions from journalists. His lawyer was the one who spoke and insisted that his client never confessed to being the author of the horrendous crime, as the police had reported. The lawyer indicated that Saba confessed everything he knew about the fact, but nothing more, and mentioned people who, according to him, had been that night in the apartment elsewhere. His lawyer said that it was not necessary to keep his client behind bars until trial and requested that he be released. But the prosecutor in the case alleged that preventive detention was necessary, since the accused was not born in the Dominican Republic, but in Colombia, and there was a risk of flight. Justice rejected the request for release, especially since Saba had previously been accused of gender and domestic violence in early 2023. So the possibility of him committing another act of violence or escaping to his native country was not ruled out. Although the investigation is still ongoing, the authorities in charge of bringing the case to trial described the brutal act as premeditated. The public ministry is trying to determine if other people participated in the death of the Venezuelan. Prosecutor Luis Tabares assured that Saba committed a horrendous crime, typical of a sociopath. In addition, he compared the defendant to American serial killers Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, who were known for their ferocity and perversity. When the trial begins, Michel Saba will face charges related to the use of an illegal silencer, possession of prohibited weapons, and, most seriously, having taken the life of Yenny Carolina Pérez Canelon. The victim's sister expressed that the authorities guaranteed her their full support in the case. In addition, he demanded that Michel Saba be brought to justice and pay the maximum penalty for the brutal crime he committed. In January 2024, Yenny's remains were cremated and sent to her family in Venezuela, where they finally said goodbye surrounded by her loved ones. This tragic incident has shocked the community, highlighting the importance of addressing the issue of arms smuggling in the Central American country. The fact that the criminal had a history of gender violence makes this case even more outrageous, which requires the Dominican government to adopt new policies that pay full attention to this background, to avoid future victims